we have already had just some amazing community connections and revelations that have happened with having this community-based show here at the Mint. We have so many pumped up visitors, and so many of them have been first-time visitors, something that's really important to us. As an educator, I love when people write thank you notes, but what's even more powerful is when people leave drawings, connecting their relationships and what they're finding in an exhibit with drawings. And so there are thousands, or hundreds, I guess you'd say, of these that we've already gotten, where people are designing a whole range. I think this one is Art Nouveau, and another one looked Egyptian. Just amazing connections that are happening with our visitors. I would like to go ahead this afternoon and say that we are thrilled that Katie Wright, our American Federation of Arts curator, is with us. And Katie has coordinated the traveling exhibition with Elizabeth and the Mint. Katie earned her PhD in modern and contemporary art from NYU and has worked at leading museums, including the Whitney, the Met, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. And she's also a talented designer in her own right. Katie, would you like to come up and say a few words?
Man, now I don't think I can get on my flight because I need to have you guys introduce me at every single event. Thank you. Wow. As mentioned, my name is Katie Wright. I am delighted to be here. This is my second time joining you all for an exhibition that we helped organize. You may remember Picasso Landscapes, which I helped organize several years ago and was at Mint Uptown. It's a pleasure to be here at Randolph. I'm by far the least key point in your celebrations this afternoon, so I want to be very quick. But for those of you who don't know, the American Federation of Arts is an organization that was actually founded in 1909 by an act of Congress to support traveling leading exhibitions to museums nationwide. We're now a standalone nonprofit, but we still maintain the traveling exhibition as the core of our mission. So we've actually traveled almost 4,000 shows in our tenure. We're very proud to have this be part of that legacy. We got the distinct pleasure of working with Elizabeth Semmelhack a few years ago in 2015 to 2017 on Out of the Box, a fabulous show about sneaker culture, and you'll see a lot of those gorgeous sneaker culture trends upstairs as well. But I just want to say again how incredible it is to work with Elizabeth. We're actually working on a new project. Come find me if you wanted to learn more about that. But also the Mint that does such an incredible job creating all of these exhibitions and designing the show. I am by no means nearly as talented as your team, but I love seeing it on view. So please enjoy, and it's my pleasure to introduce the rest of the Mint team.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'll take it back.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. I'd also like to go ahead now and introduce our Associate Curator of Craft Design and Fashion, Rebecca Elliott. And Rebecca has served as the managing curator for this installation, working with Elizabeth and the AFA team. Rebecca oversees the craft design and fashion collections, including studio jewelry, and works on a host of exhibitions. A graduate of Smith College and the University of Chicago, Rebecca came to the Mint from Museum Fine Arts Houston and the Cranbrook Art Museum, and more recently she co-curated the Mint's Craft in the Laboratory, The Science of Making Things. So, welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you to everyone. I'd like to thank PNC Bank, the presenting sponsor of this exhibition, as well as individual sponsors Katie and Chris Smalls and Ann and Michael Tarwater, whose support is integral to this exhibition. And I want to thank all of the Mint team. If you're here and a Mint staff member, could you raise your hand for a second? Excellent. Every one of these Mint staff members contributed in some way to the success of this exhibition. And I am also not one of the most key people today because I did not do the research for this. I just coordinated it at the Mint. But it has been a great pleasure for me because craft design and fashion are all about the combination of style with function. And shoes are a great example of that. They have to look cool and also be comfortable on your feet and carry you around and support your weight. And we've seen from this exhibition so many different interesting solutions to those design problems, which Elizabeth is going to enlighten us on. And to introduce Elizabeth, my great pleasure of introducing Elizabeth. She is director and senior curator of the Bata Shoe Museum. Her work focuses on the intersection of fashion, culture, and economics with a special interest in footwear. Since joining Bata in 2000, she has curated over 30 exhibitions. She's written 14 books and also written more than 30 articles and is frequently quoted in the international media. Some of her recent projects, in addition to Future Now, include, as Katie alluded to, Out of the Box, The Rise of Sneaker Culture, and collab Sneakers by Artists, and I'm going to have to get the right title here. Collab Sneakers by Culture from 2019. She's also curated Artwear, Sneakers by Artists in 2024, and Rough and Ready, A History of Cowboy Boots this past year, which is currently on view. So please join me in giving Elizabeth a warm welcome to Charlotte.
Thank you very much. And I would also like to extend my thanks to the Mint. It has been such a pleasure to work with you. I've been so warmly welcomed. I wanted to sort of give a little bit of information about who we are, what we do, and how this exhibition came to be. So the first thing that I need to do is call out Mrs. Sonia Bata. So she is the founder of our museum, and she married, as she liked to say, a shoe man. The Bata Shoe Company is one of the largest shoe companies in the world. It just has no presence in the United States. So when I, being from the United States, moved up to Canada, I had no idea I was working for Mrs. Rockefeller, basically. But she was a curious woman. She had an incredible eye. And as she traveled the world, because Bata Shoes have factories around the world, she made a very astute observation, which was people's feet are basically the same. But what they put on their feet is incredibly different. So what can be learned by studying footwear specifically? So over the years, she began collecting. 1979, she decided, by collecting, I mean, she collected. We now have 15,000 artifacts, but an artifact can be a set of shoemaker's tools or 63 drawings by a designer. So we have many, many more discrete objects. So in 1995, she opened up the Bata Shoe Museum in downtown Toronto, which was where the Bata Company had its world headquarters. But, and I really thank her for this is not a corporate museum. This is a museum, and this is our mandate, and this is why I've worked there for 25 years. My job is to tell the history of humanity through shoes. And we collect shoes that date back 4,500 years to footwear in the metaverse. So basically, for the last 25 years, I've had the luxury of asking any question I want about society, humankind, and finding a pair of shoes in our collection to start. So I had done my doctorate work in Japanese art history. No idea why she hired me, but she hired me in 2000, and so I show up knowing literally nothing about shoes. And my first question was, why the high heel? I figured this has got to be a well-researched form of footwear. It's been around for a while. I mean, literally, if you were from outer space, why would anybody put this on, right? If shoes have a job to do, which is to take you from point A to point B, well, these do a horrible job. So I wanted to start working on the history of the heel. What ended up happening was that a lot of the kind of silly stories about high heels began to fall apart as I followed the breadcrumbs further back in history. And I've been able to prove that they date back as far as 10th century Persia, where they were invented for horseback riding. So the reason why cowboys wear high heels today is because when you add a heel to a stirrup, you secure yourself in the saddle much better. So just to prove my point, in case there are any people who don't believe me, I'll meet you outside after. There were hundreds and hundreds of images of people wearing heels long before heels entered into Western fashion. So then my question was, okay, well, high heels have been around at least since the 10th century. Why do they only show up in the turn of the 17th century in Europe? Well, it has to do with world politics. It had to do with the rise of Persia and its interest in forming military alliances with Europeans. And it was at that moment when Shah Abbas I, you can see him here with his high heels, he offered the largest mounted military in the world to Europeans if they would join him to rise up against the Ottoman Empire. And some Northern Europeans were very interested in this idea, very interested in the exoticism of the heel, and so European men began to have heels added to their boots. Women did not add shoes for a couple decades after this, and the reason why heels were added to why women started to wear heels was there was a fashion craze in women's fashion to quote unquote borrow from their boyfriends' closets. So they started wearing men's style hats, they started carrying swords, some carried guns, and they wore heeled riding boots so that they looked more manly. So when I had figured this out, I was like, oh my gosh, everything I've ever learned about fashion history was not right, and shoes were literally going to take me into unseen territory, into looking at primary sources ranging from wills to sermons to texts back and forth between traders across continents. Okay, I have found my place. So then I decided to take on this form of footwear. Has anyone seen this before?
No.
This is a chopine. And chopines, like the high heel, completely under-investigated. Everyone was like, no, they were worn for just a few seconds in Venice. And I was like, oh no, I gotta figure this out. So the first thing that was said about these platforms was that they were worn in the mud. They were worn to lift Venetian women out of the muck of Venice. Well, all you have to do is look closely and you see that they all have, you can't really see it here, but they have little tufts of pink silk, little tassels all around the bottom, and the white leather was imported from Hungary. You're not gonna clomp through the mud in this. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna find myself some chopines. So I found them. Do you see the chopine? Do you see the evidence of the chopine? She is so much taller, right? So I was like, okay, now I'm figuring this out, I'm getting somewhere. And then I started reading all these sermons. The sermons were like, women and their vanity, they spend so much on cloth when they have chopines. And I realized that what was being criticized was the cost to create the skirt, to cover. And then I found out that Venetian brides, was when you got your first pair of chopines, was that when you got betrothed, they had to learn to walk without ever showing their chopines. So basically chopines were like Spanx. They changed your silhouette, but you didn't want anybody to see them, which is why nobody ever saw them except for the evidence of these very tall women. And then I found the pièce de résistance, the postcard to prove my theory. This was a postcard for people visiting Venice in the 16th century, and you could lift her skirt, and you could see her chopines underneath. So these are the kind, and here I just prove as well. This is a Van Dyke. And a lot of art historians, I am an art historian by training, have said that Van Dyck became a mannerist when he started painting in Italy. He didn't. He just painted what he saw. And so I did this little cut and paste so you can see that she's wearing these very, very high chopines in order to create this incredible outfit. So this is sort of, I'm getting into my groove. I'm looking at footwear, asking questions, following breadcrumbs, as I said, that are revealing things that I just never realized before. And so I turned my attention to sneakers. This is a pair of sneakers that we have in the collection. They're on view upstairs. They're from 1890, roughly 1898, pair of Goodyear sneakers. And a lot of people think that sneakers started out as something super cheap. Because when you see something like this today, you think, okay, that's like a pair of Skippies or a pair of Keds. You buy them for a few bucks. What they don't realize is that this time, rubber, which was only from a small part of the world, it was from Brazil, parts of Central America, rubber was this incredible material. If we think about new space-age materials today, this was the space-age material of the early 19th century. It came out looking like milk, which is why it's called latex, after the word milk. You could collect about a half a cup from a tree every other day. So the amount that you got was incredibly little. The labor required was incredibly high. And the biggest problem for Europeans and Americans when trying to work with this liquid is that by the time you would collect it all, you'd ship it by boat, you bring it all the way home, is that it had coagulated to the point that it was now kind of hard, and it was deemed only useful enough to rub out pencil marks, which is why we call it rubber. And so it took people some time to begin to figure out how to stabilize rubber. It was figured out in various ways by Charles Goodyear. Some say he stole some ideas. I think they're right. He was a maniac for rubber. He wore a rubber bow tie. He wore a rubber vest. He believed that rubber would save the world. And what he ended up doing was he boiled latex with sulfur and stabilized it. What made rubber in this form so amazing was that it was elastic and it was waterproof and it was durable, and what it did was it allowed industry to start using it. As we know, the 19th century was the height of the Industrial Revolution. And what does industry do? It makes industrial lists. And what do industrialists do, these nouveau riches? They want to express that they have made it. Before the 40-hour work week and ideas like you have the weekends off, play was the principal way that you signaled that you had arrived. So the industrialists revived the ancient game of tennis. They build these beautiful lawn tennis courts, but the challenge with tennis, lawn tennis, is that lawns are a little, damp. And lawns, also beautifully manicured lawns, can be easily damaged. So suddenly there was a market for rubber-soled canvas upper shoes. So the first sneakers were elite. They were expensive, and they were worn for people who could afford 2 pairs of shoes, a pair of shoes for the day and a pair of shoes to play. So the origin of the sneaker has now in some ways come full circle, because this story, as I'm telling it, is sort of where sneakers have landed today. But they actually started out here as this signifier of status. And we happen to have in the collection, it's not on view here, but this is an original pair of Keds Champions from 1916.
Right here.
Converse came out in 1917. What I love whenever I talk about sneakers is invariably there's someone wearing a pair. You are wearing a pair, yeah. Can you imagine designing something in 1917 that kids still thought was cool today? So it was in part these little revelations, right? Like that the heel starts out as being related to horseback riding. It leads me to doing the cowboy exhibition. Thinking about the Converse sneaker being designed in the middle of World War I, 1917, and still being cool. So as I'm constantly working on the past, I'm also seeing how these innovations are pulling themselves into our time today. So I began to think about, as I was working on all these different forms of footwear, about what we might be doing today and how that might be impacting what will come in the future. But before I get there, I just wanted to shout out the Air Jordans. You can see a bunch in the skateboard show. I've been asked a couple times, I didn't include a pair of Air Jordans in this exhibition. They, of course, were front and center in the exhibition that I did out of the box rise of sneaker culture, because they weren't super technologically innovative, but they were changed by culture and they changed culture, and that's worth calling out. I think the magic for the Air Jordan wasn't just the fact that Nike, which was going downhill, by the way. I read this article in the New York Times where some Nike exec before this launched in '85 is like, we're really hoping that this new Jordan brand will turn us around. Boy, did it turn them around. And so, but the thing that's so sort of innovative about what the Air Jordan did was, of course, it was connected to Michael Jordan. That in and of itself, this rookie basketball player, he's incredible in and of himself. But they did something that allowed sneakers to segue into being consumable items of fashion for men by making every single year, making the Air Jordan look different. It also inculcated men into consuming fashion a little bit because it did so through the armature of collecting. So when the Air Jordan came out, of course, it's not called the Air Jordan 1, it's just the Air Jordan, right? But the next year they came out, it was actually about a year and a half later, they came out with the Air Jordan 2. Then they come out with the Air Jordan 3 and the Air Jordan 4, and pretty much someone saying, I've got the 1, 2, and 3, honey, I need the 4. I gotta have the 5. And it creates desire, it creates interest in what the next season is gonna look like. And that became fundamental to the explosion that we saw later on in the 20th century. So back to future now. Okay, admittedly, this looks very old-fashioned, and it is, because we would not be here today if it were not for industrialization. So I talked about sneakers, harnessing of rubber, giving rise to industrialists, but there are many, many other steps in the history of shoemaking that created the moment in which each one of us has become basically a shoeaholic. I bet if I asked every single person here how many shoes they had in their closet, you had more than just one pair. You probably had winter boots, you might have some flip-flops, you might have shoes from your wedding, you might have shoes. You have many different reasons or many different social events, many different activities that the market has met and gives you the opportunity to wear specialized footwear for. But getting there was kind of a challenge. Shoemaking historically was something that, you had a shoemaker and you had the client, and that person needed to make a pair of shoes for you. It's very bespoke, very to your feet. That's great if you can afford it, but it's not great for lots and lots of other people who don't have the money to afford new shoes. So in the 18th century, for example, and in the early 19th century, the secondhand shoe market was huge. That was basically how the majority of people got their shoes, or maybe their employers would give them shoes. So in the early years, there were ways of trying to innovate. I included upstairs, and I hope you look at it closely, it's one of the most beautiful shoes in the collection. It's this pair of Berlin Work slippers. This is actually a funny pair of shoes because it was made during the arts and crafts movement when people were terrified that industrialization was going to get rid of important and essential crafts, shoemaking being one of them. So middle-class American women, some English women, began to make the uppers of slippers as gifts for their husbands. And then they would take the completed upper to a shoemaker who would then add the sole. The shoemaker who added the sole here has used wooden pegs. Traditionally, Western shoes are made with sewing. It's very laborious. Shoe pegs were an attempt to speed up the process. And so they were great until you stepped in some water. Obviously, indoor shoes is not such a big deal. But they could pump shoes out more quickly, but they were not able to be as durable. So it wasn't until the invention of the McKay stitcher and the Goodyear stitcher that shoes could be factory sewn. So it was, in fact, the invention of the sewing machine that also helped transform shoemaking. And then, I love this image, I use it every chance I get. It's sort of the beginnings of the shoe obsession that we all experience today. So once production could be increased, now shoes of all different kinds could be sent out across the US. And the US really was the center of shoemaking in the 19th century. And not only did they send shoes everywhere to Canada, in fact, it suppressed the Canadian shoe industry because why buy Canadian when you can buy American? And it brought it all the way west to California, and Americans were able to send a lot of shoes to other countries, including Europe. But this enthusiasm for having more shoes in your closet, more affordable shoes, better made shoes, led to something we suffer from today. Today, we make 20 billion pairs of shoes a year. That is enough for 3 new pairs of shoes for every single man, woman, and child on the planet. And so one of the focuses of the exhibition upstairs is talking about how some designs are attempting to deal with this, because this is becoming a really, really huge problem for us. Other inventions that are coming about decades earlier but having implications today are plastics. So the first plastics, ironically, were cellulose nitrate. Sorry for the brain freeze there. Cellulose nitrate was invented. It was a nascent plastic, and it was invented to create billiard balls and help with the fact that billiard balls, which were normally made out of ivory, elephants had been so overhunted that you couldn't get billiard balls anymore. So cellulose nitrate was used to create billiard balls, but the problem was that cellulose nitrate exploded. So you can see this box actually comes with a warning. So billiard balls that explode upon being hit doesn't work. But once cellulose nitrate was invented, this plastic, in fact, at first it was being used to make women's hair combs, but those also exploded while women were wearing them. In fact, there was a factory that exploded, and in France specifically, they had to create factories where women were working with cellulose nitrate to make combs, and they sat on these long benches with troughs in them with water running through, so that if something was exploding while they were working on it, they could throw it into this trough. And so very maybe unwisely, in the 1920s, when hemlines come up and shoes are finally like the star of the show, cellulose nitrate was also used to create these beautiful heels. This is an example that I have up in the exhibition. And as far as I know, there's been no exploding heels, although they were used for dancing quite a bit. And of course, this does lead to injection molding, all kinds of plastics being used for shoes. And a lot of us today, I don't know if anyone's in a pair of Crocs, but these materials transform what is currently available. Technology also shows up really, really early in footwear design. This is another pair that I have put into the exhibition. This is the Micropacer, Adidas Micropacer from 1984. What I love about it is that it was really quite simple. It just tracked how far you ran, but if you wear a Fitbit today or your phone counts your steps, that is a different wearable form, but it starts with all of this invention that's happening in the 1980s, right? So I have no idea how many steps I took today, but I have Adidas to thank. Another thing that I really wanted to impress upon people is that ideas, so I try to show how times are changed through innovation. I try to show how some concepts morph into something different later on. But I felt like one of the best illustrations of this, thinking early and it taking time to come to fruition, was this Nike mag that showed up in Back to the Future 2 in 1989. So in 1989, the film Back to the Future 2 came out, and Nike was asked to design self-lacing, those are auto-lacing sneakers that Michael J. Fox would wear when he traveled to the future of 2015. So in 1989, 2015 felt like a long ways away. We now know that's a long ways in the distance. But at the time, this idea that when you got to the future, when you got to 2015, there'd be auto-lacing sneakers, it blew everybody's mind in 1989. And people wanted these shoes, not knowing that this pair of shoes had to be plugged in order to actually auto-lace during the film. So Tinker Hatfield, who had designed them, was committed. He was committed to making these, but it actually took until 2012, around 2012, when they discovered they made batteries small enough that they could fit inside the shoe and it would have the strength to auto-lace. And then finally the auto-lacing sneaker was released, this is the release, in 2015. So it took a long time to realize this technology. And what's interesting about it is that they then tried to commercialize it. So I've got the original Air Mag, or the Air Mag from 2015, and then I've got the more public, or perch commodifiable iteration, but it hasn't proved to be popular. So you'll notice that there are a couple of these issues in the exhibition, things that when I was thinking about the exhibition in 2021, curating it, that have not yet stood the test of time. So that is, of course, what happens with innovation. Sometimes knocks it out of the park the second it happens. Sometimes it takes iterations before we can see it realized. And I don't know what's going to happen with auto-lacing shoes. The future has yet to be told. Sometimes designs, no matter what happens, just do not take off. This is a shoe made by Stephen Arpad in 1938 for Balmain. 1938. If I wore these to this talk today, you would think I was from the future. So it is very interesting to see what works and what doesn't work. Another failure is robot-made sneakers. So robotics are 100% essential to sneaker production today, footwear production today. When I was doing research for the book, I read this Art Buchwald, I think that's how you say his name, comment piece from 1981 or something. And he was talking, it was like this fake story about his friend who had a robot factory. And his robot factory, he brought his friend to see the robot, his friend brought him to see the robot factory, and the robots, they don't need time off. They don't need lights on. They don't need rights. They don't need nothing. And then he, at the very end of the story, he shows his showroom, and it's full of shoes because he's got nobody to buy them, right? So if you remove the worker, you remove the consumer. When Adidas tried their robot factories, they set two of them up, one in Germany, one in Atlanta, actually here in the United States. And they had some interesting reasons for doing it. One was that they wanted to be more responsive to the local market, so that if, let's say, Americans' feet are bigger, then they need to be able to make an adjustment and meet the market. Let's say that concern about the environment and all of the cost it takes and the energy it takes to bring things from factories in China to the United States. If you have something local, you can cut down on that waste. The problem was, and so they set these up, they were very futuristic. The factories did actually operate in the dark. There were a handful of people there to help if a robot ceased to work. But the real problem was that the changes, so this is one of the robot factory shoes, it's upstairs, Speed Factory shoes. One of the challenges that they had, though, was that when changes needed to be made, like a small change, like we need to change that gray, move that gray strap over slightly, it was so much more expensive and so much more difficult to retool a robot than to just tell a person. So people remain the better robots and can be much more responsive. So they actually closed these factories. They've taken some of this technology and integrated into human-run factories, but I don't think we've seen the end of this just yet. All of this, however, all of this industrialization has done something profound to our own relationships to our bodies. As I mentioned, one of the things that had happened before industrialization was that you would go to a shoemaker, you'd say, this is what I want. Maybe you'd bring the fabric. Maybe you'd talk to them about, I want the heel this height, whatever, my 2 feet are different sizes. And you'd walk away. I'd walk out with an Elizabeth pair of shoes. Now, when I walk into a store, I have to see what's on offer. I can't say, I've got a red dress coming up and I want it made out of this fabric. I got to walk into a store, see if anything meets what I need, and I also conceive of myself as a size 10. I don't think of myself as just Elizabeth sized. I'm a size 10. Will a size 10 fit? I personally predict, you can see if this works out to be true, but I predict that this moment in our history where industrialization has made us clothing sizes and shoe sizes is going to come to an end. I believe in 500 years, people will look back and say, wait, what? You had to buy something that was a size? Like you didn't just get something your size? And we're seeing some of this happening now. 3D printing is really a place where that's allowing for that. And my absolute favorite thing in the exhibition is not even real yet, and it is this concept. This was made by Julian Sock. He's actually, by day, he's an industrial designer in Germany, and he has imagined what I think could be very possible for us in the future. So what he's imagined here is that you 3D print, the green thing sticking out is a last. A last is what shoemakers build shoes upon that are based on shoe sizes. But you can have lasts 3D printed to your exact foot sizes. So what you would do is you would first have your last 3D printed to be exactly your shoe size. Then, yeah, okay, maybe you like download a Nike design or whatever, and you 3D print the mold for your shoes. Then you add water and corn to mycelium spores, mushroom spores, and you grow your shoes overnight. Completely biodegradable, sized to your size, and as I like to tell kids when I'm lecturing to them, you can eat them for dinner. Okay, you can compost them. But what I think is so interesting about this is that it's very localized production, so you've got no waste in terms of shipping. You've got the last can be reused over and over again, and mushroom leather, if they could just manage to figure it out, mushroom leather will save the day. Mushroom leather is the first product that truly mimics actual leather. The reason why we like leather for our footwear is that it's breathable. When you wear an all plastic shoe, you sweat. When you wear a leather shoe, there's some breathability. Mushroom leather is very similar in structure to animal leather, and so I think that it's, well, one, it's easy to grow, you can color it, it's got multiple different kinds of textures, and I do think that if we could figure it out, mark my words, we'll save the day. 3D printing does often create materials that are not compostable, but it is environmentally friendly because 3D printing is an additive process, not a subtractive process. So the best way to think about it is that if you are Michelangelo, you get a big chunk of marble and you have to chip away and create the sculpture held inside that piece of marble, leaving endless amounts of chips of marble. Shoemaking is the same. You take a hide, an animal hide, and then like cookie cutters, you cut out the patterns that you need, but unlike cookie dough, all of those leftover bits, you can't roll them back together, start again, and keep cutting. So it creates a huge amount of waste. 3D printing allows you to just build as you print, so there's no waste material. The other thing too, and this is where I really encourage designers, if I have the ability to think outside the box. Because once you can do 3D printing, you can do things in any kind of design you want. So Scry is really pushing that boundary. This is a pair of Scry that are upstairs in the exhibition. They're based in Beijing, and they really lean into biomorphic shapes. This is another image of theirs. It feels almost like it's a trachea, creating that back piece of the shoe. It feels extremely futuristic, very corporeal, and that's achievable because of 3D printing. But there are other changes that companies have been making. This is not so much concerned about environment, but concerned about accessibility. So the Nike Go Fly Ease is a very smart invention. It was done by some Nike employees for a friend of theirs, fellow Nike employee who had had a stroke. And he was struggling to be able to tie his shoes. So what they did was they thought about ski boots, which often have a back projected piece that you can step on to help you get the boot off. And they created a shoe that the interior rises up. You can see the whole sole is there at that angle. So you can, when the shoe's ready to be put on, it's in this position. You step in, step down, and click it into place. And then when you need to take it off, you step on the back, pull it up, and take your foot out. This is a part of design called universal design, which is an attempt to make something that no matter what your ability, you want it. So that it's not trying to single out individuals who need special footwear or special anything so that they get seen out in public as having to wear these accommodations. Nike was trying to make something that every cool kid would want. They were so successful, however, that these sold so fast that the intended market did not receive them. So they quickly regrouped, produced much larger amounts, and now these are readily available for people. Other changes that are happening specifically within sneakers is recognition of creators. We've had this for a while in women's footwear. Manolo Blahnik, Christian Louboutin, these are names that we know. These are shoe designers whose names we are familiar with. But if I asked you, who's the most famous designer at Nike? Of course, sneakerheads are all going to know it's Tinker, but many other people won't because Nike's not in the business of highlighting who their designers are. So people like Salehi Benbouri, he actually started out as a sneaker designer for Versace, have started to create their own studios where they are now working and doing collaborations with other sneaker companies. So he famously has done one with Crocs. I'll show you that in just a second. He's done with New Balance. And so he is doing things on his own terms, making a name for himself, and changing the way that sneaker design is happening. He was invited by Crocs in 2019, I want to say 2020, and he was the first designer that was allowed by Crocs to change the mold. What that means is that when you're mass producing shoes, you need molds for every single size you offer. So changing a mold is a huge financial investment. So he was the first invited to change the mold, and he chose his own fingerprint. And it's such a beautiful, I think, recognition of how he himself is changing the footwear game. One of my favorite pieces in the show is, of course, everybody's favorite. And this is Mr. Bailey's. What I love about it is that he'd been asked by Murakami to do a sneaker. Salehi had actually also been asked to do a sneaker for a Complex Con show called Sneakers at Breakfast. And they could do anything they wanted. And so Mr. Bailey is such a good designer that he was inspired by Murakami's work, which you can clearly see here, but he made a sneaker that is 100% mass producible. You could, in fact, bring this into production. If we had the appetite, we could be wearing these. And for me, that's very hopeful. I think that there's so much room in design to do more than we're currently doing. And I think that this is a very, very good example of what is achievable. There's also the idea of pushing concepts from the past further and further. So if you think about air, Nike added the air bladder to the Tailwind in 1979. That was the first air bladder inside a shoe. I have to say, though, that the first air bladder in a shoe was in the 1930s when someone added a heel bladder to men's heels. So anyway, Nike does it in 1979. Reebok does it. I'm wearing a pair right now. They do it with the with the Reebok Pump in 89. This is the Instapump Fury from 94. This is the actual one from 94. I'm wearing it retro. And the idea of air being used to make a lightweight sneaker. Laces are great. They help your shoes stay on your foot, but they loosen over time and they add weight. Air, of course, adds no weight. And so the shoe design here is that it has a pump, and I can inflate the air bladder in my shoe and have it fit more closely. So it's also trying to make a bespoke fit. And then on the other side is a concept illustration by Safa Sahin. He has a shoe upstairs as well, and here he's taken air in a very playful way. But something like this, I think, is also very possible. The last section of the exhibition, I was very interested in what was happening within the virtual realm. I was particularly cognizant of the fact that Jordan was dropping skins in Fortnite. And what was interesting about that was that Jordan was dropping skins in Fortnite for gamers to put on their avatars. So when you are an avatar in a metaverse space, you don't need to be anything. Like, you could be any kind of physical self that you want. And I was very interested that people wanted to replicate what they were wearing in real life, or what they dreamed of wearing in real life, within this virtual space. So it also brought men's consumption of fashion into the virtual world in a really interesting way. Artifact, which came out in 2020, they made a sneaker that was based on the Cybertruck. They invented this virtual sneaker. People thought it was real, but eventually went on auction, and it sold for the highest amount, I think it was $17,000 US, for a virtual piece of fashion. They were just doing incredible things, but it was all virtual. They started working with Jeff Staple, and he's my age, and he was like, I'm too old for this. I need a physical sneaker as well. And so they started to work with NFT for realizing NFT ownership as a physical thing. And here is an example where they worked with Murakami. Murakami got very interested in working in the digital realm, in the metaverse. And so what ended up happening is that you could, if you had the NFT, you could wear these sneakers in the metaverse. You could do a flex in the metaverse space, but then if you add the NFT, you could also acquire the physical sneaker and wear it in the real world. So this intersection between real and meta, the metaverse, was sort of happening. It seemed to be taking off, and then the NFT market crashed, and Nike completely closed Artifact. But 100%, I do not believe that this is the end of virtual fashion. The other thing, too, that I wanted to consider is the virtual realm. So the metaverse can encompass the virtual realm. But in general, when I'm talking about metaverse, I'm talking about you're sitting at a computer and you're seeing your avatar on a screen. You're watching yourself do something. When you put on a headset, a VR headset, you actually cease to see yourself. You are yourself in this virtual space. So I have a single Ecto VR shoe upstairs. And this was invented not for gaming, but for industry. So the reason why Brad Factor created the Ecto VR was to keep people who are training within VR safely in one space. The challenge with VR is that you're in a room this size, you have a headset on. You could, let's say I start walking, I can just walk into you, I can walk into you. I have no sense of where the reality is. So this shoe mimics, it flexes, it mimics how you walk, but it keeps you in one place. So it's being used to train people who go into extremely dangerous places. So it's used for people before they go to oil rigs, so that they can learn where all of the emergency equipment is, so that they will have had an embodied experience where they feel like they have already been on the oil rig, so that, let's imagine that they arrive and an emergency happens 5 minutes later, they will know where to go. They will feel where the emergency exits are. They are also doing this to train people looking for mining victims and accidents in mines. So a very interesting real life industrial application outside of gaming for these. And then the virtual world is also completely changing shoe design. Let me see if I can do this. So I have upstairs a Gravity Sketch shoe. Gravity Sketch is a headset that you put on, and you can now design footwear using Gravity Sketch with your producer in China. They put on their headset, you put on your headset, and you draw and you work. This is just to give you a tiny taste of it. Oh. So this is what he's seeing, and you can see him drawing it, working it, refining it. So it's a very small little snippet. But the idea is that it's helping to, one of the challenges with bringing something to production is that it has to be shipped back and forth between countries in order for all of the nuances to be worked out so that a product can be brought to market. This is helping designers and fabricators work much more quickly. And then lastly, I like Antonio's work. This is Antonio Archo Hernandez. He makes footwear for wear in VR. So if I were to go into VR, I could put these physically on my body. And he likes to work with liquid. And so his dream is that someday haptics or sensation will be brought into VR. I actually think that'll be a very bad idea because I think horrible things could be done in VR if we could feel those things. But the idea is that when you're walking in his boots, the water is swirling around your legs and you're feeling that water. What I find so interesting about this is that this is starting to stretch that edge of what shoes can be. We've seen some challenges and opportunities within the physical real world, but I think within the metaverse, where we have no corporeality, we have no limitations, we could be doing really, really interesting things with footwear design. So I think we are at that moment. We're seeing things here. 50 years from now, I think we will see how these seeds have grown. So that is my talk. Thank you very much. And I am happy to answer questions.
So you can share your email or whatever contact stuff 500 years from now.
Yes, as though email will exist. Don't you mean I need to give you the chip that would be in my brain? Yeah. Yes?
I'm curious to know what you think. We see a lot of sort of cyclical things in fashion, looking back towards historical fashion, bringing that into new, things. Is there a similar sort of thing that happens in footwear and sneakers, or is that because it seems like a lot of what happens in sneakers especially is truly new, truly never been done before?
It's a really interesting question, and this cyclicality is very much linked to industrialization, right? There didn't seem to be that same, every 20 years something comes back, if you go to the 18th century, for example. So in sneakers, part of it is retros, right? Like the Samba's back, or when the Stan Smith had a big deal, or even the Superstar. So we do have these moments where there's nostalgia, but in part because sneakers and sneaker companies really have had historically discomfort, even though Nike's the largest fashion house in the world. It does not consider itself that. It wants to remain an athletic-focused business. And so it is constantly trying to create sneakers that will help athletes. And that is driving a great deal of this innovation. Because do I really care if my sneaker is 10% lighter than it was last year? No. But for a runner, yes. And so that is what often drives a look at new materials, new ways of lightening the load, basically lightness being the principal motivator at the moment. So it's true that there is retros within footwear, but that often has to do with nostalgia. There's great innovation that is happening within footwear constantly. Yeah. Yeah.
So one thing that I see with basketball players is that a lot of them are signing with Chinese brands.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler wears Chinese shoe.
Yeah.
Kyrie Irving
Yep.
just put on his Kyrie with them. What brand from that country do you see becoming streetwear here in America?
It's a good question, and I think actually right now is a very fraught time for that question, right? Because there would even be the tariff.
Yeah.
But I'm being serious.
Yeah.
It's like, the Buy America can be very strong at the moment. I think that relationships, how do I put this? In the most diplomatic way. I think that we've seen it with Japan, right? Onitsuke Tiger, right? It's been around forever. I think that it's wherever culture decides cool lives. That's going to be my answer. Yeah.
The lifestyle shoe, you said it was maybe compostable, but what does that mean for all weather versatility?
Right. I mean, it is literally a fantasy. It's not anywhere close to being a reality. So at the moment, it's just a very straightforward concept. of trying to make something that could be reproducible every day and could just last for that moment, right? So I don't know if it were to become true, I'm sure that whatever the corn was that would be used to grow it, you would end up with additives and things like that that could improve durability, if need be. Yeah.
How is AI playing a role in the industry?
So it's interesting. It feels like there were all of these really interesting ideas, right? You had all of the Snapchat try-on things. There was Gucci was leveraging that quite a bit. I don't know if it was the pandemic where we had to rely so fully on what we saw online that made wanting to get things that you could feel or see, try on, more important. But AI is still used. Like, you can try on shoes, but the appetite for it doesn't seem to be as enthusiastic. I think Gen Z is not as cool with it. You know, they're more interested in vintage and authentic. And so I think that there's a huge potential there, but I think that we're in a bit of a lull at the moment. Yeah. Anything else? Yes. Okay.
You have talked about some innovations that came from outside of footwear, like the billiard balls,
Yes.
cellulose and things.
Yeah.
Has there been any material innovation or technological innovation in footwear that made its way out into other types of product design or elsewhere in the world?
That's a very good question, and I don't really have the answer to that. I mean, I think that things like wearable technology, sort of starting at the footwear level, but that's intimately linked to the personal computer, so that would be a hard one to say chicken or egg. Some innovations that were done for moon boots have shown up in other forms of footwear, but that's not necessarily, so I'll have to get back to you on that one. But it's a good question. Yeah. Yes.
Is there any material, I mean, you talked about leather, what leather you get on,
Yeah.
and obviously with the rainforest and everything,
Yes.
rubber is, got lots of issues around the current state of rubber.
Correct.
And the environment. How is it that since then to today, there's no alternative product?
Well,
Or sneakers or tires or whatever. Is there anything?
there is actually. Yeah. So what happened was during World War II, so the whole story, I won't tell you all of it, but what happens is that in the 19th century, the rubber plants are secreted out of Brazil against Brazilian government's wishes by the British, and they're brought to Africa. So if you think about what happened in Congo, right? That all of that horrible stuff with Leopold II was because of rubber cultivation, just to speak to the appetite for rubber. Then it's brought to East Asia, and it actually creates a rubber shoe market within Asia. The flip-flop that we all wear was a Japanese product that was mass-produced in the 1930s. So you have a lot of things going on with rubber, but when World War II happens, the Japanese now control the largest amount of rubber-producing areas in the world, which leads the US. They're terrified that either the Japanese or the Germans are going to figure out synthetic rubber, so the Americans do it. So almost everything in the post-World War II moment is no longer raw rubber. There are some companies that use real rubber harvested from trees today, but the majority do not. And so what that did was it led to synthetic rubber, it led to the creation of EVA foams, polyvinyl chloride. So something that you might feel is functioning like rubber for you, it usually has very little rubber in it. So it has, rubber is still used particularly by Veja is a company that uses rubber that's ethically sourced from the Amazon, but most companies are doing all synthetics. And in fact, one of the shoes I have in the exhibition in Allbirds, one of the problems with all of these synthetic products is that they do not decompose. And so Allbirds has made a foam out of sugarcane. And they did something really interesting. They made it open source. Like normally companies are extremely proprietal and they do not want anybody to know what their secret formula is. They made it open source so that everybody can make their foams using sugarcane. And so that's another sort of step forward. We have the same effect. It feels like rubber, it feels cushiony, but it's made from sugarcane and it's more ethical. Anything else? I'm off the hook? Okay, thank you.